Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashleigh, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. I want to start today by telling you something that took me a long time to say out loud. There is a stone sitting in my collection, a large piece of azurite that I have a complicated relationship with, not because it didn't work, but because it worked in a way that I wasn't fully prepared for. Because azurite didn't give me something, it took something away. And for a long time, I wasn't sure I was ready to talk about what that was on a podcast, in public, where people could hear me say it, which, and I want you to hold this thought, is exactly what azurite does. It finds the thing you are performing, the version of yourself you have carefully constructed to be acceptable to other people, the beliefs you inherited without questioning them, the identity you've been maintaining because it was easier than the alternative. And it just starts pulling at the seam. Not violently, not all at once, just quietly, persistently, with that deep, impossible blue. Until one day you look down and realize the whole thing has come apart in your hands. Today's Crystal Library episode is on azurite. And I'll tell you right now, this one is personal. This one goes places I haven't gone on this show before because I think azurite deserves that. And honestly, I think you deserve that too. What I want to offer you today is not the standard azurite story. You can find that anywhere. Third eye activation, psychic development, stress relief, intuition upgrades, all of that is true. None of that is the point. The point is what the ancient Egyptian priests knew and deliberately kept secret. The point is what Edgar Cayce meant when he called this the singing stone and said he could not do his work without it. The point is what happens when you stop carrying azurite like an accessory and start taking seriously what it is actually offering you, which is not a gift. It's an invitation to lose everything that was never really yours to begin with. Welcome to Big Crystal Energy. I'm Ashleigh, and this is the Crystal Library. So let's talk about what you've probably already heard about azurite. It's a third eye stone. It enhances psychic ability. It supports intuition. It helps with stress and worry. It's connected to Sagittarius, and I'm a Sagittarius sun, so of course I love that. It's often found with malachite. It's a beautiful, deep blue copper carbonate mineral, and it's been used in spiritual practice for thousands of years. All of that is true. And none of it will prepare you for what this stone actually does. Here's what I've noticed about the way azurite gets talked about in the crystal community. And I say this with love because I am part of this community. We have a tendency to sand down the edges of powerful stones, to make them palatable, to translate, this will systematically dismantle your false identity, into great for clarity and intuition. We do it because it's more comfortable for us and for our audience. But I think we do a disservice to the stone. And more importantly, I think we do a disservice to the people who are drawn to it. Because if you are drawn to azurite, there is a reason. And that reason probably isn't stress relief. Azurite is what I would call a demolition stone wearing the clothes of an illumination stone. The illumination part is real. The psychic opening is real. The third eye activation, also real. But what nobody tells you is what has to be destroyed before any of that becomes available to you. You cannot see clearly through a window that's been painted over with every belief you were handed before you were old enough to question it. Every story about who you are, what you're allowed to want, what's acceptable, what's respectable, what's safe to say out loud. Azurite doesn't clean the window. It takes out the wall, okay? How many of you have bought an Azurite tumble because something like this? Because someone told you it was good for stress. And how many of you were told what it might actually ask of you in return? Because there is a cost, not in the dark, scary sense, but in the honest sense. Azurite asks you to pay with the false version of yourself. And most people, most of us, aren't warned about that when we pick it up for the first time. I know I was not. So today we're going to talk about what Azurite actually is, where it came from, who knew what it could do, and who decided that that knowledge needed to be protected, and what it means to work with this stone with your eyes open, fully consenting to what you're inviting in. Because there is a difference between carrying Azurite and being worked on by Azurite. And I think it's time we talked about that difference. Before we go into the history, I need to tell you something about what Azurite actually is at the physical level. Because the physical truth of this stone is inseparable from its spiritual truth. Azurite is a copper carbonate hydroxide mineral. I am not going to tell you what its chemical formula is, but it forms in the oxidized zones of copper ore deposits, which means it is literally born from a process of decay. Copper deposits exposed to air, to water, to time. Azurite is what happens when something breaks down and something else becomes possible. It has a hardness of only 3.5 to 4 on the Mohs scale. For reference, your fingernail is about a 2.5. This is not a hard stone. This is not an armored stone. For something that carries this much power, it is remarkably, almost paradoxically fragile. But here's what I wasn't expecting when I started researching this stone. Azurite is chemically unstable. Given enough time, moisture, air, Azurite naturally, inevitably transforms into malachite. That deep, impossibly blue slowly becomes green, and you can see that here on the stone. The mineral doesn't die, it becomes something else entirely. And this is why you so often find Azurite and malachite together in the same specimen. You're not looking at two different stones sharing space. You are looking at one stone in the process of becoming another. There is even a geological term for what happens when malachite takes on the crystal shape of Azurite during this transformation. It's called a pseudomorph, which literally translates to false form. Malachite wearing Azurite's shape. Take a moment with that. It's absolutely fascinating. And truth be told, I did not know that until I started researching this episode. I always wondered why you would see them together. The stone most associated with dismantling false identity, with stripping away the programmed beliefs and the performed versions of yourself, is itself subject to the same process. It cannot hold its own form forever. It is always slowly in the process of becoming something it wasn't before. There is no more honest teacher than that. Azurite does not stand outside the lesson it teaches. It embodies it completely, down to the molecular level. The piece sitting in your collection right now, it is transforming. Slowly and perceptibly, but it is not the same stone it was 1,000 years ago, and it will not be the same stone 1,000 years from now. Nothing holds its form forever. not the stone, not the beliefs, not the version of you that you've been protecting. That is the first thing Azurite wants you to know. I want to take you back, way, way back, because Azurite has been in relationship with human beings for a very long time. And the way those relationships looked across different cultures and different centuries tells us something important about what this stone actually is. Let's start with something that genuinely reframed this stone for me when I learned it. For approximately 8,000 years, from around 6,000 BCE through to the 17th century, azurite was the most important blue pigment available to human civilization. Not one of the important blues, not the most important blue. Okay, it begins at, I'm probably going to say this wrong, Catalhoyuk, one of the oldest known human settlements in what is now Anatolia, Turkey. The walls of the shrines there were painted with azurite, the oldest sacred spaces we have record of, painted with this stone. From there, the thread runs unbroken. The ancient Egyptians used azurite as a component in the pigment known as Egyptian blue, one of the most widespread pigments across the entire Mediterranean world through the Greek and Roman periods. The ancient Chinese used it, the Maya used it, in Babylon it was used for cylinder seals. In the American Southwest, indigenous peoples shaped it into tools, small axes, and spear points, suggesting it held a significance beyond decoration. And then in medieval Europe, azurite became the source for the most important blue in painting from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance and into the 1600s. The illuminated manuscripts, the altarpieces, the robes of the Virgin Mary in paintings you have walked past in museums without knowing what you were looking at. Azurite was the blue of heaven, literally. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, the actual physical material that human beings across completely separate civilizations simultaneously, independently chose to represent the sacred, the divine, the celestial. Think about what that means. Before there was a shared metaphysical tradition, before crystal books and spiritual communities and online shops, humanity looked at this stone and collectively, instinctively understood that it belonged to something beyond the ordinary. And then there is ancient Egypt. Azurite was considered so sacred in ancient Egypt that its secrets were known only to the priesthood, not the general population, not even the educated class, the priests, the ones whose entire function was to hold the threshold between the human world and the divine world. They protected this knowledge deliberately. And Cleopatra, one of the most powerful, strategically brilliant women in recorded history, is noted to have prized azurite, combined with malachite, specifically for its supernatural properties. A woman who weaponized every tool available to her, who understood the relationship between perception, power, and the unseen. She chose this stone. Now, I want to introduce you to someone who, for me, is the most compelling figure in Azurite's modern history. His name was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was an American clairvoyant who lived from 1877 to 1945. He is one of the most documented psychics in recorded history. He gave over 14,000 readings in his lifetime. And the way he worked was extraordinary. He would enter a self-induced hypnotic trance state, laying down, eyes closed, and from that state, he would deliver detailed, specific readings on medical conditions, past lives, spiritual development, and prophecy for people he had never met, describing conditions and recommending treatments that were, in many cases, later validated by modern medicine. He was known as the sleeping prophet, and Edgar Cayce had a name for azurite that no one else in history had given it. He called it lapis linguis, the singing stone. And he famously said that he would not have been able to channel his visions without it. Not that it helped, not that it was useful, that he could not do what he did without this particular stone. So here's the question I want you to sit with as we move through this episode. What did the Egyptian priests know that made them protect this knowledge rather than share it? What did Cleopatra understand about this stone's relationship to power and perception? What did Edgar Cayce mean when he called it the singing stone? And what was it singing? Because I don't think any of these people were responding to a stone that was good for stress relief and third eye activation. I think they were responding to something that demanded a level of preparation, discernment, and willingness that most people, then and now, aren't warned about. The gatekeeping wasn't about hoarding power. It was about recognizing that Azurite's gifts require a container. It requires readiness. It requires a person who has decided consciously, deliberately, that they are willing to be taken apart. And here we are, thousands of years later, with Azurite tumbles in every crystal shop and on every spiritual gift list, which raises a question I think the stone would very much want us to ask. Accessibility and readiness are not the same thing. So let's talk about what Azurite actually does. Not the polished version, the real version. Every source I have ever read on this stone, across every tradition, every author, every approach, circles around the same core truth without quite landing on it directly. They use words like clarity, illumination, psychic development, third eye activation, and those things are real, but they are the result. They are what becomes available after something else has happened first. What happens first is the demolition. Judy Hall describes Azurite as a stone that challenges your view of reality, that it releases long-standing blocks in communication, that it urges the soul toward enlightenment by letting go of programmed belief systems to move into the unknown without fear. Nicholas Pearson describes it as a stone that pinpoints and releases limiting beliefs and mental habits, specifically the ones that affect your self-perception, your worldview, and your ability to grow. He says it invites honest and critical self-reflection and can reveal emotions to the hidden conscious mind that have been hidden there. Hidden, not lost, hidden. There is a difference between something you don't know and something you know but have buried because looking at it directly felt like too much. Azurite goes after the buried things. And here's where I want to get specific, because one of the most common and most socially acceptable forms of false identity that Azurite targets is something almost nobody wants to admit they're doing: seeking approval. Author Cassandra Eason notes that Azurite specifically overcomes the need for approval from others. And I want to pause on that because I think we tend to read lines like that and think, oh, wait, that's about confidence. That's not about caring what people think. That's a nice affirmation. But it's not an affirmation. It's a diagnosis. Seeking approval is not a personality quirk. It is one of the most deeply embedded survival strategies the human psyche constructs. From the time we are small, we learn which version of ourselves gets accepted, gets loved, gets to stay safe, and we build that version carefully. We perform it consistently. We protect it fiercely. And over time, we stop knowing the difference between who we actually are and who we learn to be in order to be acceptable. That is not a small thing to dismantle. That is the architecture of an entire identity. And Azurite, this soft, fragile, chemically unstable blue stone, looks at that architecture and begins quietly and persistently to pull at the seam. Not because your need for approval makes you weak, but because you cannot see clearly while you are performing for an audience. You cannot gain access, genuine access, and genuine intuition while you are constantly monitoring how you appear to others. You cannot receive real psychic clarity while a significant portion of your energy is devoted to managing other people's perceptions of you. The third eye cannot open while it's pointed outward, watching for judgment. This is what the Egyptian priests understood. This is what Cleopatra understood. This is what Edgar Cayce understood when he called this stone the singing stone and made it central to his trance work. You cannot channel anything real while you are still performing. The void state that Azurite facilitates, the no mind, the deep meditative stillness that the historical record keeps pointing to, is not something you achieve. It is something that becomes available when enough of the false structure has been cleared away, when the performance stops, when you stop listening for other people, for what other people think long enough to hear what is actually true. That is the demolition. And I want to be clear about something. This is not a dark process. It is not a punishment. It is not the stone working against you. It is the most profound act of care a stone can offer, because what gets demolished was never you. It was the armor you built before you knew you were safe enough to take it off. Azurite just helps you remember that you are. I want to tell you about a shop outside of Salem, Massachusetts. It's called Ravenstone Gifts. And if you ever find yourself anywhere near Salem, I want you to go there. It is one of the most beautiful crystal shops I have ever walked into in my entire life. About a year ago, I walked through the door of the shop and there was this particular piece of Azurite. And I knew immediately, the way you know sometimes, not with your head, not with any kind of reasoning, just this full body recognition. This is mine. This came here for me. I brought it home and I sat with it. And what came over me wasn't a vision or a download or anything dramatic. It was quieter than that. It was just this deep, settled sense that this connection I have to crystals, to stones, to this practice feels so completely innate to me that I couldn't find the logic anymore in being afraid of it, in keeping it small, in carefully managing how much of it I let people see. And then something more uncomfortable surfaced. I realized I wasn't fully showing up as myself, even here, even on this podcast. The thing I built, the thing that is supposed to be mine, I was still editing it, still performing a version of myself that felt safe enough, still dancing around a title that I knew in my bones belonged to me. The title of which I had never fully claimed it. Not on this show. I'd been circling it, getting close and then pulling back because I was scared of what people would think, scared that if I said it out loud, if I really owned it, someone would decide that what I was doing was wrong, dark, evil, that I was one of those people who works with the dark arts. I sat with that fear and I looked at my Azurite and I thought, how? How could something this stunning, this extraordinary, this achingly beautiful that came from this earth, that was made by this planet over millions of years, how could any of this be evil? How could something that has made me more myself, more honest, more connected to what I actually believe, how could that be something to be ashamed of? It couldn't. It isn't. I love dark things, dark music, dark art, dark aesthetics. I always have, and none of it is evil. That's not what dark means. Dark means depth. Dark means the parts of existence that don't perform for the light. And there's nothing wrong with living there. Shortly after I brought that piece of Azurite home, I recorded an episode where I claimed the title of which out loud for the first time on Big Crystal Energy. No caveats, no softening, just this is who I am, this is what I am, this path chose me, and I'm choosing it back. And then I started talking about it everywhere, in public, at work. All of my coworkers now know I consider myself a witch. And you know what happened? Nothing bad. Some people showed genuine curiosity. Some people had questions. Most people, the ones I had been so afraid of, didn't seem scared of me at all. The judgment I had been so carefully protecting myself against, mostly didn't come. Which is the thing about approval seeking that Azurite seems to understand before we do. The cage we build to keep ourselves safe is almost always bigger than the threat we built it for. Now, and I want to be honest about this, the work isn't finished. There are still places I hold back, still moments where I catch myself editing before I speak, still limiting beliefs I haven't fully looked at yet. Azurite isn't done with me, and I don't think I'm done with it either. But I am more myself now than I was before I walked into that shop outside of Salem. And I am more myself on this podcast than I was a year ago. And I think that matters. I think that's the whole point. The stone didn't give me a new identity. It demolished the performance I'd been maintaining over the real one. And what was underneath was just me the whole time. I want to talk to you directly for a minute. If you came to this episode because you love Azurite, or because you're curious about it, or because someone recommended it to you, I'm glad you're here. And I want to ask you something that I wish someone had asked me earlier in my relationship with this stone. What are you actually asking for when you work with Azurite? Not what you think you're supposed to want, not the answer that sounds most spiritually evolved, the honest answer, because there are really two ways to be in relationship with this stone. You can carry it, keep it on your nightstand, hold it when you meditate, appreciate its beauty, feel its energy, and there is nothing wrong with that. Stones meet us where we are. Azurite will work with you at whatever level you're available for. But then there's the other thing. The thing the Egyptian priests understood, the thing Cayce was pointing to when he called it the singing stone, the thing that Azurite has been quietly doing to people for thousands of years when they got close enough and stayed still enough to let it. The actual demolition. And that requires something specific from you. It requires you to be willing to look at the performance, the version of you've been maintaining for other people's comfort, the beliefs you've inherited that you've never fully examined, the identity you've constructed around being acceptable, being safe, being whatever you needed to be to avoid the judgment you were afraid of. It requires you to be willing to ask, what would I think, say, do, be if I genuinely stopped caring whether anyone approved of it? That is not a small question. I know, because I had to ask it myself, and I had to ask it about this podcast, about the title I was scared to claim, about the practice I was editing before I shared it, about the version of myself I was presenting instead of the real one. And here is what I want you to know. The answer doesn't have to be, yes, I'm ready. Let's burn everything down right now. The honest answer might be, not yet. I'm not there yet. The cage still feels safer than the alternative. That is a valid place to be. That is a true place to be. But here's the thing about Azurite. Here's what I think the gatekeepers were actually protecting people from. Not the stone's power, but the gap between what we say we want and what we're actually willing to go through. Because if you pick up Azurite and tell it you want clarity, you want psychic vision, you want your third eye open, and you're not willing to release the approval seeking that's been keeping it closed, you're asking the stone to give you something while holding on to the exact thing that's blocking it. That's not how this works. The vision becomes available when the performance stops. The channel opens when you stop managing the audience. The singing starts when you get quiet enough to hear it. And you cannot get that quiet while you're still listening for what other people think. So the question I want to leave you with before we talk about how to actually work with this stone is this. Are you ready to find out what's underneath the performance? Not who you're supposed to be, not who you've been told you are, not the version of you that other people find acceptable or comfortable or safe. Who you actually are. Because that's what's on the other side of what Azurite is offering. And in my experience, it's worth every single thing it asks you to give up. So let's talk about how to actually work with this stone. And I want to start by reframing what that means in the context of everything we've discussed today. Working with Azurite is not about adding something to your practice. It's not about acquiring a new skill or upgrading your psychic abilities or achieving a higher state. Working with Azurite is about consenting to removal. It's about creating the conditions deliberately, intentionally, for the false structures to come down. Everything I'm about to share with you needs to be understood through that lens. Care for the stone first, before anything else. How you physically tend to azurite matters. This is one of the most fragile stones in your collection. With a hardness of only 3.5 to 4, it scratches easily, it fades in direct sunlight, and because of its chemical instability, that transformation into malachite we talked about earlier, water is not your friend here. Do not cleanse azurite with water ever. Instead, cleanse it with sound, a singing bowl, your own voice, a bell, or place it on a selenite charging plate, or use moonlight, or simply your breath and intention. I want you to notice that the stone requiring this level of intentional, careful tending is not incidental. A stone doing this level of work deserves that kind of attention. Carelessness with azurite, physically or spiritually, is a signal that you're not quite ready to receive what it's offering. Next is meditation, removing yourself from the audience. The most well-known practice with azurite is placing it on or near the third eye during meditation. You might not want to use a big piece like this, maybe something smaller like this. And yes, do that, but I want you to understand what you're actually doing when you do it. You are removing yourself from the performance. In meditation, there is no audience. There is no one to manage, no perception to monitor, no version of yourself to maintain. The practice of sitting still with azurite at your third eye is the practice of stopping the performance long enough for something true to surface. Don't go in looking for visions or downloads. Go in looking for silence. The singing that Cayce talked about, the lapis linguis, doesn't compete with the noise of your performing mind. It becomes audible when the noise stops. Start with 5 to 10 minutes, azurite at the third eye or held in your non-dominant hand, no agenda, no desired outcome, just stopping. Third is dream work. Place azurite near your bed or under your pillow for dream work. Once again, probably not a big piece like this. Your unconscious mind does not perform. It does not manage appearances or edit for acceptability. It tells the truth in the language of symbol and image. Azurite and the dream state together are a powerful combination, specifically because of this. What your waking, performing self works hard to keep buried, your sleeping self will surface. Keep a journal beside your bed. Write immediately upon waking, before the performing mind fully activates and starts deciding what's acceptable to remember. And then we have the approval audit. This is a practice I want to offer you that is specific to everything we've talked about today. Sit with your azurite, get quiet, and ask yourself, honestly, without judgment, where am I still performing? Not in a general sense, specifically in your relationships, in your work, in your spiritual practice, on your social media, in the conversations where you edit before you speak, in the rooms where you make yourself smaller. Where are you still managing an audience? Write it down. Don't analyze it yet. Just let azurite show you where the seams are. The analysis comes later. The first step is simply being willing to see. Also, the carrying versus wearing. Azurite is a copper-based mineral. Copper is electrically conductive, and wearing azurite directly against your skin amplifies its work considerably. The historical practice of wearing it, touching the skin, particularly on the right hand or at the third eye, is not arbitrary. But I want to be honest with you about this. Wearing azurite against your skin is not a casual decision given what we've talked about today. It's an intensification of the consent you're giving. If you're beginning your relationship with the stone, carry it first, keep it in your pocket, your bag, your space. Let it work at the pace that's right for where you are. When you feel ready to deepen that, wear it, but do it consciously and know what you're saying yes to. Also, there's azurite with malachite. When you work with azurite and malachite together, either as a natural combination specimen or intentionally paired, you are adding a grounded heart energy to the demolition work. Malachite brings the emotional body fully into the process. It deepens the clearing of old patterns and ancient blocks. If Azurite is the stone that shows you where the false structures are, Malachite helps you feel your way through dismantling them. They work as a team. And given that Azurite literally becomes Malachite over time, there is something deeply right about working with them together. One final note. This is not a stone to rush with. The Egyptian priests didn't protect this knowledge because the process was fast or simple. Cayce didn't treat Azurite as a casual tool. The work this stone does is real work. It happens at the pace it happens. You do not get to push it. What you can do is show up consistently, tend the stone with care, create the conditions for the demolition to happen, meditation, dream work, honest self-reflection, and then trust the process. The blue, the beautiful blue, will do the rest. I want to come back to where we began. That piece of Azurite in my collection, the one I found in a shop outside of Salem, Massachusetts about a year ago, the one that looked at me the moment I walked through the door and made it very clear it was coming home with me. It sits in my space right now as I record this in my hand, and I look at it differently than I did a year ago. Not because it has changed, though we now know that on some imperceptible molecular level it is always changing, but because I have, slowly, imperfectly, in ways I didn't always choose consciously and couldn't always see while they were happening. That is what this stone does. Not quickly, not dramatically, not in a single meditation or a single revelation or a single episode of a podcast where someone finally says the thing they've been afraid to say. It works the way geology works, the way Azurite becomes Malachite, slowly, persistently, one molecule at a time, until one day you look down and realize the thing you were is not the thing you are anymore. And here is the thing I want to leave you with today, because I think it's the truest thing I can offer you. This work, the work of taking down our false identities, of releasing the fear of judgment, of stopping the performance long enough to find out who we actually are underneath it, it does not happen quickly. It is not a destination you arrive at. It is a practice. It is something you choose every single day, sometimes every single hour, sometimes in the middle of a conversation where you feel the old pull to make yourself smaller, and you have to decide again whether to listen to it. Azurite is not a shortcut to that work. It is a companion in it. It is that beautiful, fragile, chemically unstable, impossibly blue reminder that transformation is real, that things do change, that the false form does not have to be the final form, but only if we are willing to keep doing the work. The priests knew that. Cayce knew that. Cleopatra knew that. And somewhere in you, in the part of you that was drawn to this episode, that picked up this stone, that has been listening today, you know it too. The singing stone is still singing. The only question is whether you're ready to get quiet enough to hear it. Thank you for being here for this one. This episode came from somewhere very real for me, and I hope it landed somewhere very real for you. If it did, share it with someone who needs it. Please, I always love if you could leave a review. Come find me on Instagram or Threads or my new Substack and tell me what came up for you. And if you have Azurite, go sit with it today. See what it has to say. Bye. Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.mama.ash or at Bid Crystal Energy Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps this magic reach more curious souls. Until next time, keep your crystals close and your intuition closer.